the lanes that we have in B2C and B2B, while they are different in terms of a timeline and the number of people that are involved in the decision making, at the end of the road, it's still a human that you're touching, and it's still a human that you have to have an impact on.
Admit that you don't know things, because that's how you start learning things.
We have to really think about it from a consumer lens and be where they're going to be and know that they're going to be bopping around. They're like a ping pong ball.
They have data across thousands of companies saying it's actually something like 60 or 65 encounters and engagements that somebody has to have before they're ready to raise their hand and say, I'm ready to talk to a salesperson.
You know, Chuck, before we dive in, quick update for this episode. It's a special one. We are doing a reverse situation here. I guess it's like a Freaky Friday situation. Chuck's taking the back seat, and I'm running point on this one.
And I'm actually here to provide the expert commentary for once, instead of Nick being the expert. It's weird being on this side of the conversation.
Yep, but today we're sitting down with Tanya Thorson, a fractional CMO who spent 20 plus years proving that B2B and B2C are fundamentally dead categories. What's replacing them? B2A, business to anyone.
And in this episode, we're going to be talking B2B as well as B2C, which is unusual for us. For example, if you think MQLs and SQLs matter, Tanya's going to set you straight. She calls them meaningless metrics that no CEO actually understands or cares about. And she's not wrong. I've never met a CEO who gets excited about lead counts.
She breaks down why the funnel we've all been optimizing for decades doesn't actually exist. Buyers aren't thinking, I'm in discovery stage right now. I hope that I get a white paper. They're bouncing around like ping pong balls, and they're still treating them like they're moving in a straight line.
And Tanya talks about something that we don't talk about enough, and that's internal friction. She says the real problem isn't your website, it's your organization. Sales and marketing fighting over credit, stores versus digital, dead-end incentive structures that make people territorial instead of customer-focused.
She also flips the script on friction itself. It says frictionless doesn't mean zero friction. Some friction actually builds confidence and trust. Her definition, frictionless is fewer second guesses.
And my Ungating case study comes up again, where here at Blue Triangle, we went from 97% of visitors hitting a dead end to an average of 9 pages of content consumption. Tanya's been fighting the gated content battle her whole career, as many of us have.
If you've ever wondered why retail brands seem to get customer experience better than SaaS companies, or why your go-to-market strategy feels like it was built in 2010, this episode is going to rewire how you think about all of it.
Let's get into it.
Welcome to the Frictionless Experience, the podcast where we lay waste to digital friction. I'm Nick Paladino.
And I'm Chuck Moxley.
And today we're joined with Tanya Thorson. Tanya, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Tanya, can you go through your background a little bit just to kind of understand where you came from and how you're thinking about digital friction?
First, thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here. And my experience started 20-some years ago. I was actually in the stores. I was a store manager for Express Company International, and that really will date me. But what it did is it created a foundation of where I wanted to go in my career. And that was, I wanted to do something that helped people. And retail was something that I loved. I love product. I love clothing. And Land's End, which was headquartered in my backyard, I started working there and had many positions there, but I left there as women's swimwear merchant. As Dave Dyer, the CEO, used to say, if women's swimwear has a good season, Land's End has a great year. So we were a very influential business, and I had the opportunity to really drive that business during the digital transformation. After that, various positions. I worked at LL Bean, moved to Columbus, worked for Limited 2 Justice, New Balance, Chico's, and then made my way back to Wisconsin, which is where I'm from, and started working for Jockey International. There, I was significantly involved in building the premium product that Target, I think we all know who Target is. That was an opportunity for Jockey to have a partnership with Target, and I was the leader in driving that business. And it was an opportunity not just for myself, but for them as a company. They were looking for a premium brand underwear line. And we were able to come in and fix that and drive traffic and drive the business to beat its original plan. And we were ready then to launch women's after that. Most recently, I took a pivot into a high growth cybersecurity SaaS startup. Yes, I know. Why? What makes no sense. It was 2020, and I think we all know what has been happening with retail. Things were starting to centralize, stores were starting to close, brands were starting to file Chapter 11. I wanted to work and I wanted to put my brain into another industry. And SaaS was pretty much everybody was talking about it in 2020. And I wanted to learn that business. And so I started working for that company called Network Perception. And we were able to be acquired in the last 3.5 years that I was there, built the business from the ground up from a marketing engine. And some of the things that I noticed as moving into a B2B SaaS world from a B2C world, I saw a lot of synergies that I thought could happen and we could institute in the B2B SaaS world. But of course, I waited until I got the lay of the land. And we'll talk more about this, but the principles and the methodologies of consumer first, consumer central focus has always been in a B2C environment. And moving into a B2B SaaS world, I saw a lot of dependence on the product and not the consumer. And we made some of those changes happen. And with those changes that we made happen, moving into much more of a buyer-centric, a consumer-centric, creating more of an omnipresence, driving a quality content and creating an omni experience for the end user, we were able to tighten up our pipeline velocity by 50%, obviously improve our win rate, create higher frequency, and we doubled our annual recurring revenue that got us to a place to be acquired. And so that's my background.
Very interesting. I like that you in our pre-cap when we were talking about it at the prep call, you mentioned how B2B and B2C isn't really the right way to think about it, but it's really B2A. Can you kind of unpack B2A for us a little bit?
So my husband has been in the B2B manufacturing space. I've come from B2C with my last opportunity with a high growth startup at Network Perception. We started having conversations and we started talking in some of the same language. And it was almost as if the lanes that we have in B2C and B2B, while they are different in terms of a timeline and the number of people that are involved in the decision making, at the end of the road, it's still a human that you're touching, and it's still a human that you have to have an impact on, an influence. And so that's where we came up with Business to Anyone, B2A. And that's what created the book that we wrote, Get Off Your Mass. And the M is in parentheses. So basically it's saying get off your ass and start, thinking about how you're marketing, not spray and pray, but more so being more influential and being more specific and being more focused and creating that community and creating that ecosystem so your potential buyers feel like they're part of that and you're helping them build that trust and credibility. And that's really how we started. It was just having, coffee conversations at the table.
And that's where Tanya and I aligned because I co-authored a book on one-to-one marketing. And we covered the same topic. We talked about the fact that in the end, you're still selling to people. It's a business that's buying. And we actually had a whole chapter on what's the difference between B2B and B2C and how are they similar? And in the end, a lot of the same principles that you talk about in your book align with what we were saying about how to, personalize, how to be more relevant in what you say, et cetera. So there's a lot of connection.
The first chapter is called The Curiosity Creed, and it talks about how we're just not curious anymore. We've become transactional. We have all this data that we're just getting dumped. We have all this software. Buy this so you can see where your customer is going to be. Like, we're trying to get so prescriptive with the consumer to a fault, where we're losing visibility to really what the numbers and what the metrics mean, because we're so inundated with getting that dashboard ready, and we've lost sight of actually the true consumer. And we're not thinking about them from a consumer lens. And I see that as a huge opportunity as we continue to move forward, because the way that B2B is functioning is through a funnel and through segmentations. And that's not how the customer shops. They're not thinking, oh, I'm in discovery stage right now, so I'm hoping that I get a white paper that I get to download. They're not thinking about that. And we all know that today's buyer is much more independent than they were 18 months ago. I forget the Gartner stat, is it 10 to 12 times that they're going to touch something from your brand before they reach out to you. So we have to really think about it from a consumer lens and be where they're going to be, and know that they're going to be bopping around. They're like a ping pong ball. And so there's this whole nonlinear environment that is called omni or multi-channel. And some of us are still operating like we're in 2010, with the playbook being product led and please call me and request a demo and spend 45 minutes on the phone with me. It's just not happening.
Yeah, the nonlinear I can relate to, because I've talked about the football field. I came up with the football field analogy of and this is in the SaaS and B2B world, where the sale moves down the field and then it goes back somebody leaves, a new person comes in the purchase process, throws a wrench in, privacy, security, it's stuff that Nick and I see all the time. And now the sale moves back down the field in the opposite direction. You got to move the ball down the field, et cetera. And sometimes it gets dropped. And the point I was trying to align with was the nonlinear way that people buy. But in marketing, we tend to think, and even in digital, we tend to think in terms of linear progression.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it's false. It's fake. And I was just on a call this morning where we were talking about the funnel, and some people still talk in MQL, SQL. Some people still have those acronyms. And with my background being in retail, I started as a merchant. And then when you're a merchant, you're responsible for the business, meaning you're responsible for the P&L. You're responsible for bringing new customers as well as lifetime value. And having that genesis of that in my foundation, when I started working in the SaaS environment, we were talking in that language. And I was like, what does that mean? Who cares if it's an MQL? It doesn't matter until we can use your football analogy until it gets to the finish line. That's the way I was always thinking. And so creating that type of environment at Network Perception was something we did, is we broke down those silos. We started looking at what our end goals were. So we knew that we were all accountable for the P&L number, and then worked back to what piece of the responsibility that we were accountable for. And I believe that's what we really need to do today, is give marketing meaningful metrics instead of meaningless metrics.
I love meaningful metrics, but what are you implying here?
Well, MQL, conversion, click, opened, downloaded a white paper.
I've never met a CEO who cared about MQLs and SQLs or even understood half of what they are. Yet and that really comes out of that corporate world, where sometimes that's the only way to measure marketing, because there's that handoff to sales, and that's the problem.
Absolutely. No, I agree. And I think the meaningless is metrics that your CEO, your CFO, your CIO don't understand. I mean, an MQL, I know in our world, it's all created individually. So there's not like one way of looking at an MQL in terms of, like, we had Marketo. So we used Marketo as our CRM platform, and we could adjust it. If we weren't seeing the numbers we wanted to see or the influx of leads that we wanted to see, you just adjusted those numbers. It's all subjective.
So I'm going to go ahead and prove why I'm the one that's like generally guiding the conversation and not talking like Chuck is on this one, because honest to God, I thought we were talking about query language. I just had to look it up to remind myself that this means qualified lead. So let's just take a minute and just acknowledge
Yes,
that.
SQL queries we're not going to talk about at all.
Wait, how did that come up?
Well, some people probably do call them queer language. Oh, that's funny. That's good. Well, at least you're being honest.
Hey, if there's anything that's just general advice, it's admit that you don't know things, because that's how you start learning things.
Just for the listener, marketing qualified lead, sales qualified lead, MQL, SQL is what we were talking about. And that's a very common vernacular in the B2B SaaS world. MQL is marketing's responsibility, and then SQL is basically when it gets to sales and they say it's qualified and often becomes an opportunity.
And their people is the issue. Marketing and sales, they need to be intertwined.
Well, say more on that, because I feel like I live that life every single day right now. And I'm over here jiving with my CMO actively on a podcast, but I'm also actively talking to prospects every single day. And those two things don't necessarily join too well without me kind of joining that together. So let's go ahead and how do we merge sales and marketing more seamlessly?
I think it starts just sitting at the same table together and talking about the personas you're going after, talking about the messaging that you want to create, talking about what are those halos or what are those arcs of themes that you want to go after, and making sure that content and the outcomes you are all aligned with and speaking the same language. I see marketing as the connective tissue to all of the departments, and I'll call it the cross-functional champion, making sure that everybody is operating individually, but we're all operating together as one. And I see that with sales, especially in B2B and B2B SaaS. It's really important that those two departments start looking at the business together from inception to commercialization.
Do you find, Tanya, that one thing that helps is to align to revenue as the outcome? Because everybody can get behind revenue. In fact, I look at it as a three-legged stool of CS, customer success, and sales and marketing should operate as a three-legged stool, because we're not just responsible for the initial sale, but for renewal, for upsells.
Absolutely. And I'm glad you brought that up, because in startups, especially, you see a lot of, we need new logos, we need more logos. And we forget about the customers that have already committed to us with a subscription. And eventually that turns into churn. So it's finding that balance of CAC and lifetime value. And sometimes I see that as imperative metrics to start to look at, because that's going to tell you what your lifeline looks like. It's going to tell you you're going to be able to see a lot of things.
So, Nick, I think my favorite retailer and I need therapy.
You and another website?
I've waited 5 seconds for it to load. 5. I could have gone and brewed coffee.
That's a quick coffee maker, first of all, but that sounds like a performance issue to me.
Yeah, instead of communicating, it just spun.
So you left, I'm sure. Classic abandonment issue due to latency.
Exactly. And that's why the Lowe's SRE team built site speed targets with Blue Triangle. so their users don't get ghosted by loading icons.
This is 5 steps to faster pages and fewer heartbreaks, all in the context of improved experience and improved revenue.
In fact, we turned it into a free playbook.
It's like a couples therapy for your digital experience, for you and your website, Chuck.
So be sure to grab the 5-step site speed target playbook at bluetriangle.com/playbook.
Because love is patient, but users aren't. What do you see are some of the dead ends for B2B's campaigns and their websites and their way they're being perceived, especially when you're talking about product-led organizations? And how do they start thinking this way to elevate beyond just, here's my product, look at it, look at the features, they're amazing?
It's talking through what the customer's pain points are and what those outcomes may be. And so taking it all back to numbers, are there things that we can help quantify, saves you time, creates efficiencies within your supply chain, improves your a lever on the P&L? Those are things that people are going to want to hear and see. And that's where you have to start taking the narrative away from the product so much, but talking about the product and what it does for the consumer. And so websites, in my opinion, because we are talking digital here, that's your storefront. So you want to make sure that you have enough information on your landing page, your homepage, that will give a potential new customer what those things may be. So you have 5 to 7 seconds where you might draw someone in. So making sure that your homepage is providing you with that type of information. And I always say no road should lead to a dead end. So every time, keep them clicking, keep the curiosity coming through. So if it's case studies, or if it's a specific industry, or if it's a specific white paper that they're looking for, you're continuously giving them information to help them build credibility for the brand that they're looking at, and potentially trust, and someone that they would consider.
Yeah, I'm going to shoehorn the concept that you just said, dead ends. No one should hit a dead end, and kind of make the analogy that feels very similar to digital friction in a B2C world. And the dead end that they're hitting is effectively where they've hit that friction and now they're exiting. So where do you see those common dead ends, and how can we learn to just frankly know that they exist?
From a digital perspective, you want to keep the customer, the potential customer, on the website. So it's continuously providing them with insight and intel. As I mentioned, in B2C, when you're talking B2C, you're talking in stores, you want to make sure that you're creating that ecosystem, that community, and that individual is being helped, if it's through just customer service, or if it's being helped when they come to the store. Traffic is really important now, the traffic that you do get into the stores. So make sure that you're optimizing it and converting that into revenue, because we know most people today are doing a lot of their research independently. A lot of it's digital. In the B2C world, however, many of the sales and the transactions still happen in the store. So you have that one last opportunity to convert that through. And in the store experience today is really important.
One of the topics that we've heard from a lot of guests on the Frictionless experience is when you get into omni-channel in a retail environment and you've got stores and you've got website, that's where internal conflict becomes the issue, because they've got competing goals. We've heard some amazing stories in that. And I know that's one of the things you've talked about, is some of the internal politics, internal conflict. What have you seen there?
We have to stop that. We have to, we really do. And Walmart today, they just reported their earnings yesterday, and everything is running in uniform, and nobody's looking at if it's direct or if it's through the web, they're looking at the business holistically. And once you have that mindset and you start thinking that way and talking that way, it becomes common language. And then everybody looks at not just the piece that they're responsible for, but they're looking at the whole piece of the whole pie.
But doesn't that kind of boil down, like at a top line, you're investing in Walmart and you're watching the stock ticker? 100%, I'm with you. But what about the store manager that doesn't get credit because they have poor bonus structure that doesn't say like an online sale that's picked up there is their credit, yet they're having to work towards it. So when you have those conflicting goals and issues that exist, like how do you realign that? Like to me, that's one of the biggest struggles that has always existed in a multi-channel aspect, because I saw that struggle at Depot over and over and over again.
You don't want to become territorial. And I see it as thinking about what's best for the customer. Working in retail, a colleague of mine who was at DSW, the way they would operate was more about what you were saying, protecting, so I get this sale, instead of thinking about how can I get these shoes to the customer as quickly and as efficiently. They would take from the warehouse, they'd take them to the store, so the store would get credit, and then the store would ship them to the customer, when you should be shipping it directly from the warehouse to the customer. So it's a mindset game. I think it's important that people feel like they're still doing and contributing. And it's, I think it's a paradigm change in how you look at the business. And when you start thinking about what's best for the consumer, I think all those things kind of get put to the side.
Although people still talk with their pocketbook. So to Nick's point about incentives, it sounds like one of the keys is aligning incentives. And that is not dissimilar from B2B in that when sales and marketing incentives are aligned, when we're reporting on pipeline and we're reporting on revenue, and we're not reporting on MQLs and SQLs and things like that, it's a lot easier for us to all be aligned around revenue. And I personally hate the term marketing sourced revenue, sales sourced revenue, and that whole concept. It's just not the way people buy today.
No, well, they don't, because think about it, Chuck. I mean, they might have been on your website. They might have seen something on LinkedIn. They might have been on Instagram, wherever their paid media is. And so to give credit to sales or marketing, to me, it's the lines are getting blurred, and it's the buyer that's doing that, and we want the buyer to be able to have and see this brand in multiple places. It's not just an email that goes out anymore. That's one component, and all of the other variables and all the other channels that the potential buyer can do their research could be, it could be marketing, it could be sales, depending on where they're at in the funnel. And that's why the funnel doesn't matter to me. It's fictitious, because you have these stages within the funnel, and that's where marketing stops and then sales starts. No, the customer doesn't think that way.
And you mentioned multi-touches. There's actually a company called Hockey Stack that works with SaaS companies. Yeah, they have data across thousands of companies saying it's actually something like 60 or 65 encounters and engagements that somebody has to have before they're ready to raise their hand and say, I'm ready to talk to a salesperson. That's that dark funnel. They want the 8 months of research and all that up front. And I know at Blue Triangle, that's one of the things we measured, and we saw, because we used Hockey Stack, and we actually saw the same thing. We saw it was about 60 before somebody would come in and say, I'm ready to do a demo. And so if you only focus on the one conversion point, you're missing the actual purchase and what caused them to get to that point.
It's a different model today because of where the buyer is at. And we're a little behind. The buyer's there, and they're in the driver's seat today. And we're still behaving like they're in this funnel. And it's a paradigm shift in how we look at that.
So one more dead end I'll mention. I posted on LinkedIn last month about Ungating exercise that we did at Blue Triangle.
that's the one that I got like 75,000 impressions, my comment.
The post got like almost 300,000 views. It went nuts and a lot of comments, but it resonated with people. And that was one of the things that we saw in that case study was when we were gating our ebooks, we were seeing, because one of the things with the Blue Triangle platform, because we use our own platform, we could actually see what happened after they came to that page. And what we saw was it was about a page and a half of content consumption while it was gated. When we ungated it, our average went up to 9 pages of consumption. So it goes back to your point of you got to keep them researching, get them to go, in the case of our case, platform pages and demo pages and other ways to learn and go deeper on the product. And we were stopping 97% of the people coming to the page because we put the darn gate up.
Like we used to always have this conversation when I was at Network Perception, gated versus ungated. And I always said, well, how many do you think you're losing because they don't want to give your information? And obviously you proved it a lot. We had a recorded live demo so they could watch it on their own time. So it's just that whole mindset of thinking about how's it going to make it easier for the consumer. We have to live, eat, and breathe that every day because that's what it's about. I mean, I don't like to give my information out. And if I have to gate something or if I have to put my information in with it gated, sometimes I just pass on.
So while preparing for this, we talked about the POISE framework. You want to get into that a little bit, Tanya?
So POISE framework is part of the book. It's a framework that I've actually used my entire career. We put a name to it as we were writing the book. And so POISE, the P stands for personalization, O is omni-channel, I is innovation, S is strategy, and then E is emotional intelligence. And I believe if you build your business go-to-market strategy with that foundation, you're hitting what you need to hit in terms of making sure that the customer is being seen, making sure that your messaging is consistent, making sure that you're building that credibility and that trust by outreach through an omni-channel environment, and making sure that you're personalizing and using that emotional intelligence. Less is more. Try to find that persona and try to do as much homework as you can to understand their pain points and potential outcomes that they're looking for. So you personalize it, your messaging in a way that makes it feel like you're talking to just them instead of a generic email that has a blank a blank space in there where you just put someone's name in. That's meaningless today. But if you can talk about, I saw you were just awarded X, Y, and Z, or congrats on Q4 earnings. I noticed something that makes them go, wow, they did their homework. They know about me. They care about me.
So it sounds like you weight relevance above personalization. Personalization is, hey, Chuck, et cetera, right? That's what some people think is personalization. Relevance is, I know you are struggling with this problem. I think we can help solve that problem.
Exactly. Nicely said. I mean, that's exactly what it is. And you really want this in terms of friction, this is one of those that you want it to be frictionless. So I always say great personalization reduces hesitation because it reduces that ambiguity, right? So the buyer is asking, is this for me? And that's really what you want to make sure that you're answering in the content that they're reading or the outreach that you're putting.
So what about the intersection of emotional intelligence and AI? Because that seems to be something that to me is kind of changing everything. I can go ask ChatGPT to summarize me in a paragraph and it's going to be a better autobiography than I could write myself.
I look at it as the AI is doing the heavy lifting. The days of us downloading, I mean, Chuck, all this data, and we'd go in a room for 3 days and we'd be like, okay, we're going to figure something out with all this information. Now AI can do that for us. And I'm saying that in the most simplistic terms, but that's how I use AI, because it'll give us that information much quicker. And it's what we then do with that information in terms of how we look at the business going forward. And I mean, that's the beautiful thing, is there is AI to help with that and start being closer, in my opinion, to your customer because of all that information and that data that they're able to compile and give you information. But it's what you do with that information is what's going to be the emotional intelligence.
I kind of wonder if it's going to make people just assume everything's AI.
I think so. And some people.
Something you said, Tanya, and that made me think, do you remember when suddenly, because this relates back to your book about moving off of mass, right? Used to be, same ad had to go to everybody. And then at some point they developed the technology where you could swap out the ad, you could swap out a headline, swap out an image, etc. What my experience was, and I was coming at it from both, came from the agency side over to the marketer side, when a lot of that transition was happening, it wasn't practical, because what you had to go back to creative team and say, okay, now we need 300 versions of every ad, or we need 30 versions of the ad. And they're going, okay, well, that's like 3 weeks of work, and that's another 10 grand. And, and everybody, and then we got to get all that uploaded and the whole bit. In the old way, before AI, in today's world, I got to believe that's one of those problems that AI could solve. That's an example of AI doing the heavy lifting piece of that, where it could, in theory, create all the versions of the ads, do all of that.
And it's the prompt that you put in. Sometimes there may be common language that you're using across personas. Maybe it's just the industry that's different. So I think there's ways that you can repurpose things that you don't have 323 to your example, but that's where I see AI helping us get even more closer to our personas and the people that we want to become our customers. And to me, that's the emotional intelligence, because that's where you can start building that trust and that confidence and alleviating that hesitation, and them becoming much more certain that this is who I want to work with, or this is the brand that I want to partner with.
So, Tanya, what is one widely held belief about frictionless digital experiences that you think people get wrong and that you fundamentally just disagree with?
I would say people think frictionless means zero friction. And I would say that some friction adds value because it builds that confidence and that trust. To me, the goal is to remove pointless friction from silos, from unclear journeys, and keep the helpful fiction that guides the decision, like clear proof, expectations, and guardrails. So I would say that's my answer. It's frictionless as fewer second guesses.
Well, this has been a fantastic conversation, Tanya, and a lot of fun. A little bit of chaos in the midst of all this recording, and that's what makes it exciting. So, if our listeners want to get in touch with you, Tanya, what's the best way?
They can reach me on LinkedIn, and I will definitely give you my email address. Anyone can reach out to me via my email address. And I'd love to also share with you all my book, Get Off Your Mask. If anyone's interested in learning more about the POISE framework and more about Get Off Your Mask, B2A, Business to Anyone, Marketing Reimagined, it's available on Amazon.
Well, thanks for tuning in to the Frictionless Experience. We appreciate you being part of this journey and into the messy, fascinating world of innovation behind the scenes. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with a friend or colleague. If it was helpful, connect with Chuck and me on LinkedIn and check out our latest tips on reducing digital friction. I am at Paladino, and Chuck is
at Chuck Moxley.